Welcome everyone, Costin here with the discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. In this video I want to talk about the hardest legendary lords and factions to play in the game currently. It is in a beta, it still has development to be done, there's plenty of things that need to be fixed, there are factions that are broken, there are lords that are broken, there are research issues, bugs across the board. Plenty of problems that Creative Assembly needs to fix currently. But as it stands right now in the first iteration of Immortal Empires, what are the hardest legendary lords to play in the game at the moment? Well, first off, let's talk about what makes a legendary lord hard. It's the positioning. Where do you start? How much do you have to travel to reach other regions? How close are other settlements? What kind of factions do you have near you? Do you have major challengers next to you from the very start, including other legendary lords, or do you not? Do you have to fight those other legendary lords, or can you avoid it? Those are the kind of things that do matter. Position makes or breaks a legendary lord in Total War, Warhammer. And especially so in Immortal Empires. You can have campaigns, even with the same faction, that some legendary lords are incredibly easy, like with Kislev for instance. Boris Ursus, because of his position alone, is significantly easier to play than either Katarin or Costin, just purely on his position. But beyond that, there's other things. There's the question of armies, because you are going to be using largely, for the most part, with the exception of the Warriors of Chaos, but you're going to be using tier 1 armies. Well, how strong are your early game armies? How strong are your armies in general? For instance, the Dwarves, for all the problems that they may have in all of their campaigns, including Belegar especially, but for all the issues they may have, Dwarves have an incredible unit roster for tier 1 and tier 2, because they get access, because their dwarf warriors are really good, but more than that, they also have quarrelers, and quarrelers are not just great ranged units with a great deal of armor piercing, but they're also good units that have very solid melee stats. Like if we look at quarrelers and we compare them to dwarf warriors, we can see that yes, dwarf warriors are better in melee, sure, but not by a very significant amount. Quarrelers will hold their own, and that's beyond the fact that quarrelers are very solid range units as well. So dwarves may have issues, but they do have a powerful army. And finally, what kind of campaign mechanics do you have? Your economy. Can you support an army? Can you support 2 armies? How difficult is that going to be? When you're playing on Legendary in particular, or higher difficulties in general, it doesn't matter that you can support 1 stack of troops. It matters that you are able to support multiple stacks of troops at the same time from as early as possible. Some factions can do this. Warriors of Chaos or the Empire or some other factions can do this very well. Others may struggle a great deal with that. So with all of this in mind, let's start talking about individual legendary lords. So at number 5, we have Eltharion the Grim. Now this might be a bit surprising because the High Elves do have a pretty solid early game army. However, despite that, and despite the fact that Eltharion is a very strong lord himself, I'd argue that individually speaking, he probably has the strongest mechanics due to his Mistwalker units, his ability to interrogate enemy lords in his prison for various benefits, influence, experience, etc. Despite all that, his campaign is pretty brutal. At least early on. Later on, once you stabilize, if you manage to stabilize the situation, as I've managed to do so here in this campaign on Legendary, things can start looking up, but your start does have some major issues. You start off the coast here in the southern Badlands. You start with Eltharion, Caval, and an army of a couple of units, these Silver Vanguard, these Faith Bearers, Archers, Spearmen, Eagle Claw, Bolt Throwers. You start off the coast here. And you take the settlement. Once you take the settlement, you're given a choice, because you also start with the city of Torivres and a small army here. You're given a choice. You can either keep Torivres and gain a huge amount of influence, but you will have to fight Greenskin, a minor Greenskin faction that does hold settlement here, has an army outside of the settlement here, as well as the entirety of Southern Ivres. You can fight them, you'll gain a lot of influence. Or you can give Torivres to Tyrion. I'm sure the actual lore accurate Eltharion the Grim would absolutely do that with Tyrion. But you can give Torivres to Tyrion. He'll do a pretty decent job, because Tyrion is one of the strongest legendary lords in the entire game. And look at his situation. This is turn 30. Yes, if I toggle the Fog of War, yes, the coastline has been taken by Noctilus. Noctilus seems to be doing that quite often in this campaign. The vampire towns are actually fairly strong. But Tyrion has taken Effain. He's taken a portion of Safri, and Safri has been wiped out largely by Alariel. But Tyrion is in a really strong position. Torivres is going to be fairly safe because the High Elves don't really have that many major foes. Like, Noctilus is not going to be enough to defeat the High Elves on his own, and there's no one else. No, I am not counting Nakari because, well, Nakari is a meaningless twat who's well, just insignificant, really. It's turn 30. Nakari's only got another settlement. That's it. I'll get into Nakari in just a moment, though, because there is something to be talked about there. But either way, so you have that choice. Now, if you give Torivres to Tyrion, you get a significant amount of gold and some temporary growth. But despite the huge stockpile of gold that you are going to have, 25,000, which will go a long way towards helping your early economy, and you do have a strong tier 1 army, your position is bananas. Welcome to the Southlands Thunderdome. Welcome to hell. I'm allied with Cetron right now, who is getting his ass whooped by Manfred by looks of it right now in this campaign. How humiliating. Manfred von Karstein beating the crap out of Cetra. Maybe I should go help him out. Because likely Manfred will be coming for me next. But the problem you're going to face is this. You're surrounded by a bunch of legendary lords. You have Rapans, you have Volkmar, you have Cetra. And most crucially, you have Warzag and Skarbrand and Malagor. Malagor starts right next to you pretty much here in the Marshes of Madness. Skarbrand is going to start here in Death Gorge, and he's going to march over here, so very close, next door region, and Warzag is going to start right to the north of you. And here's a reality check. Warzag, Malagor, and almost certainly Skarbrand will declare war on you. The orcs hate you, so any orc faction you encounter is likely going to declare war against you, because your faction situation is you get minus 80 diplomatic relations with greenskins. The greenskins want to fight you. Any greenskin faction is going to declare war on you. And you start with a minor settlement that you have to conquer with not too great of an army to begin with, actually, not that many troops. And then you're going to be dealing with the one faction that in most campaigns ends up taking not just the entirety of the Badlands, but the Savage Orcs under Warzag generally take the Dwarven capital. So you're fighting what ends up being for the AI from an AI perspective here in terms of AI factions, not player factions, but you're fighting one of the strongest AI factions in the game from the very start, pretty much, because he's going to declare on you very early on, and he's going to march stacks of troops. Having to fight an entire stack of troops from of Savage Orcs early on is pretty rough. Now, granted, there are some benefits in terms of this as a high elf, because you do have spearmen and archers, so they are quite capable, at least in defense in a settlement. Like, that's how I managed to defeat them. He sent in a stack of troops over here. I had an army. I held the line in the siege battle, and then I marched and kicked his ass, wiped him out. That's how I was able to survive. But then you have the Beastmen coming in. Now, the Beastmen armies are enough, like the early game Beastmen armies are nothing particularly special. It's easy enough to defend them. But the fact you've got both you've got both the Orcs and the Beastmen declaring war on you pretty early on is pretty scary. The only silver lining I've had in this campaign early on so far is that for whatever reason, Skarbrand is here. He's a tourist on vacation or something. For whatever reason, Scarbrand, instead of coming to finish the job, because I did get pretty beaten up, he's instead decided to go after some silver host army because he's apparently at war with them. It is just a bizarre situation, really. Like, the AI sometimes, or a lot of the times, just doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense, to be honest with you, in quite a few ways. Like, I don't understand why the Silver Host has an army there. I don't understand why Scarbrand is chasing it across the map. It is a bizarre showing, but it's one of the things that's actually worked in my favor, that the AI is kind of being foolish right now. Like, the AI will abandon heavily fortified settlements for far less fortified ones, or will make extremely questionable decisions. So, like, for instance, Barak Var over here, with their main settlement under siege, literally moved their army out. They were under siege by this Greenskin faction, though their army has gotten wiped out in the meantime. They abandoned their main settlement to set up shop here. It just a really bizarre situation. I think it has to do with the way attrition works in sieges. But yeah, point about Eltharion, he might have a pretty solid endgame, but his start is a nightmare, to put them plainly. It is one thing to have to fight a lot from the very start, but to fight 2, 3, maybe more legendary lords from the very start is something else. And that's just the start. It's not like it's gonna get much better. Like, I'm at war with Manfred, Clan Moors, and who knows, maybe Skarsnik will show up. Though granted, you can get some good relations with the Dwarfs, thankfully, and I do have decent enough relations, I guess, with Rapans and Volkmar, so I'm not likely going to face a war with them. Stand before the for now, at least, though they might become an issue later on. Maybe you should ally them instead of allying Cetra as I have. But yeah. Number 5, Volkmar the Grim. It is a questionable thing to start to have a settlement here and your army here. One decision you could make if you are playing Eltharion that would make your campaign a lot easier. One decision you could make is you could decide to keep Tor of Rest, disband this entire army here. Yeah, you will lose some units. Disband the entire army here and just really start in Tor of Rest. Go for an Ulf 1 Tor of Rest campaign, which probably would be one of the strongest and easiest factions you could play if you do that. And it might make more sense, because this is another issue when it comes to Eltharion. His campaign victory conditions are to defend Ulf 1, which he doesn't care about. He genuinely cares about the rest, but his long campaign, defeat the main Dark Elf factions as well. That's ridiculous, as I see it. Now, his short campaign victory, and this might be an oversight, and I don't know how it works, but his short campaign is to get a Spired Citadel in Tor of Rest and occupy, loot, raise, or sack 30 different settlements. Now, the thing that I'm wondering about the Citadel here is the following. Does it matter? Does it apply if Tyrion constructs it? Because if it does, okay, fine, you can go on the Badlands journey. But if it doesn't, and I have to somehow make a diplomatic relation work with Tyrion, that is going to be a problem. So yeah, issues abound for Eltharion. Some issues with the design currently of his faction in Immortal Empires. I just don't think it really works all that well, to be quite honest with you. I think if he had a decent amount of gold and all of Ivres, I don't know, like it is just one of those things. Like the split starts are annoying. It was an issue with Emmerich. It was an issue with Eltharion himself in Mortal Empires in Warhammer too, but I'd say right now, given all the plentiful of legendary lords right here in the Badlands and the Southlands, it is a bigger problem. And number 4, we have Nakari, and Nakari is a very interesting design decision by Creative Assembly, I gotta say. So let's take a legendary lord of a faction that has no range units, is all about speed on the battlefield and winning for that, and let's throw them in a situation where they're fighting one of the strongest range factions in the entire game, on an island filled with these factions with the High Elves against 3 legendary lords. Now, it's not quite a disaster from turn 1. Eltharion has a far worse start in that respect. But the problem with Nakari is you will almost certainly end up fighting Alariel, Tyrion, and Eltharion. Eltharion, when you're not playing him, Eltharion actually starts in Wolf 1 when you're not playing him. So he is going to defend Torre of Res. So you have 3 of the strongest legendary lords against that are leading one of the strongest factions in the entire game, and you're on your own against all of the High Elven factions. Your only ally, if you will, so to speak, is Noctilus. Now, Noctilus is going to do a decent enough job in Western Ulthuan, but he stands no chance against taking on the scourge that is Tyrion. So you end up in a situation where you're likely going to end up fighting Alariel, Tyrion, and Eltharion essentially on your own, with an army that is not suited for it. Now, are there any redeeming factors for it? Well, sadly enough, not a lot. Your economy is awful. Like, let's just put it like this: your economic buildings generate barely any income, like 150, and that's with a lot of not upgrades. That's with a lot of benefits going for that. So you don't really have a strong economy. None of the demonic factions have a strong economy, which is actually one of their Achilles' heel, if you will. So that's the first problem. Your armies are not suitable in terms of dealing with the elves, because all you really start with are demonettes and and marauders of Slaanesh, devoted marauders of Slaanesh. Now, the marauders. The marauders are good at taking shots because they are shielded and they are anti-infantry, but you're gonna have a hard time fighting these battles. It gets even worse when you consider the fact that Alariel is likely gonna take the Phoenix Gate, and you need to go through the Phoenix Gate in order to reach Safri. Why would you want to reach Safri? Because they likely are going to become your vassal from the very start. So, any particular silver linings that can make this work? Well, there are 2. First off is the fact that you do have multiple elven factions and you can end up forcing vassalization on them. Safri in particular starts with a great deal of seductive influence because they have a cult, they have a lot of corruption, so you can certainly build this up and then force vassalization on them. That's the first thing. The second thing that actually really keeps Nakari in the game, so to speak, is the Disciple army. Basically, this will summon a full stack army that doesn't cost anything except disciples. I can't do it now, but it's one of the things that has kept me in the game so far, allowed me to get as far as I have here on this campaign on Legendary. But look at the situation. This is one of the initial settlements I have. Like, the starting settlement is the Shrine. You can take Tora Akare early on, but now I have Kotik coming in. Crix has taken Illyrian, so their army is there. They're not going to be of any use to me. I've tried setting up a cult here. It hasn't really worked in any way. Though, if you do establish some kind of diplomatic relations with Kotik early on, you might be able to make it work. But all the same, you do have a limit in how much you can force vassalization. Now, I do have Alariel, and I do have the Scourge of Cain as vassals because, well, I defeated both of them, subjugated both of them. Now, I'm not quite certain Alariel is going to accept that situation, to be quite honest with you. Seductive influence is gonna start going down. She really dislikes me, so she might actually rebel against me over here. So I think trying to keep her as a vassal is going to be a hard thing. In theory, I suppose you could vassalize her, Tyrion, like I've gotten the Gift of Slaanesh on Tyrion, as I have put in the Gift of Slaanesh on Alariel. because I defeated both of them in the battle. Like, Tyrion sent... Like, this is the problem. Alariel will have a fairly strong army, a full stack army, or multiple stacks, or a stack and a half, so to speak. Tyrion also is likely going to ally her pretty early on, so you want to take this fight with Alariel, because you can't allow... Because what she tends to do is declare war on Sapphire and take them out, so you need to pick that fight. The problem is Alariel is very difficult to deal with, and another issue is you have to get through the Phoenix Gate, which is almost likely going to take from the Scourge of Cain. Now, you can vassalize Crix early on, you can vassalize the Scourge of Cain, but yeah, you're just in a really bad position, because your army is not good enough, really, to deal with just, like, even these tier 1 archers. Now, obviously, as a player, you can run in circles around AI. Absolutely, there are ways to win it, and you can outnumber them with using disciple armies, but you are in for a very hard fight and a very hard campaign start if you are playing as Nakari. Like with Eltharion, though, I feel like if you do manage to get past the very first few turns, things do start improving by quite a substantial amount, because if you can take all of Ulthuan, or a majority of Ulthuan, and vassalize some of the factions, maybe not all of them, but if you can vassalize like Alariel and Tyrion, and maybe Eltharion, then you're going to have a really powerful, you're going to become a real powerhouse of a faction with all the vassals, with all the armies they'll produce. That is certainly going to help you a great deal. And then you can go around the map and spreading seductive influence, spreading cults, and really expanding your territory, because like if you take Ulthuan, you can just move on in to Bretonnia and like just subjugate these factions if you so desire. Your campaign victory conditions, well, this is where things do get annoying, to say the least. I mean, short campaign victory conditions, that's fine, right? You know, take the Shrine of Asuryan, take Avalon, attain Ivres. Not unreasonable, perfectly reasonable, perfectly fine, and that's what you're naturally going to do. But these long campaign victory conditions, like, basically wipe out all the other factions of Chaos. It's like, to understand that, you would have to go here to understand the issue in this. You would have to go here, so two opposites, like the northwest, northeast, southeast to deal with Kugaf, south to deal with Scarbrand, and absolute south to deal with to deal with Kairos. Like it's just like the campaign victory conditions are also bullshit, and that's certainly something that adds to the difficulty as well. Like when you have to go through something like that, for something like that, it isn't exactly a great campaign situation to deal with. But yeah, Nakari, really rough start, unsuitable army, weak economy, everyone hates him. Like all the elves, don't be surprised if all the elves end up declaring war against you, and you're gonna end up having to fight them. You can make diplomatic relations with them work to a certain degree, but then you also run into the problem where you want to vassalize factions because you do want the vassal tribute, right? You don't want the vassal tribute because it's going to be worth quite a decent amount compared to your crappy economy. You do want to get the vassal tribute. Like if you look at the situation here, I'm generating a bit from trade, some from my building income, and some from my vassals, but I'm really reliant on the background income, as well as sacking settlements. Like the reason I have 14,000 here is because I've sacked settlements. So really rough start, really rough campaign. People have noted that the research just doesn't necessarily make sense. Like, oh, the blood god's disgust. It's like you lose diplomatic relations with Khorne, and you get benefits when fighting Khorne, but you're not going to fight Khorne. Your campaign is not going to be about fighting Khorne. That's going to be an afterthought. Your campaign is going to be about fighting elves, and yet you're really poorly suited towards doing that. Now, at number 3, we have Karl Franz. I've talked about how the Imperial authority system is broken in a separate video. You can check that out, but that is one of the bigger issues that you do start with. But it is an issue that you do share with Balthazar Gelt, who starts here as well. However, Balthazar Gelt's campaign is not necessarily something I would describe as being difficult, because he does start with Forced Soul over here. He only starts a war with a minor orcish faction, and then he has a great deal of flexibility to go deal with various issues. My advice, go after Vlad, take out Sylvania, get the gold mine, get the territory there. It's going to be very, very useful for you. So, Gelt, although he is dealing with a really broken system, does not have a hard campaign. On the other hand, Franz does have a hard campaign, because he not only has that broken system, which causes enough headaches in itself, he also has this Imperial Secessionist faction that is a hard enough one to deal with. Like, they've got 6 units here, okay, alright, you're gonna be able to deal with them. But even in the best case scenario, it's likely going to take you like 5 to 7 turns to take out these guys, get all of the Reichland, and then take Helmgard. And you do want to take Helmgard. Wasting 7 turns on a rebel faction would be an issue in any campaign in the entire game. But it is especially bad for Franz. The reason is he's got Grom the Punch over here to the top. Now, Grom doesn't have any real natural rival. He only has minor factions that only hold a handful of settlements. So he's got Pavaron over here, and he's going to take them out very quickly within a couple of turns. And then he has these 2 minor Bretonnian factions in Bordello and Baston, but these are minor factions. They're not a threat. The only major threats that Grom may face are the Wood Elves, who are not really aggressive all that much, and tend to be more aggressive towards the Dwarves anyway. Karak Norn in particular, and Karak Azor. And then you have the Fey Enchantress, who has her own issues to deal with, including Client Scryer and this minor Orcish faction, which he is going to be able to defeat very quickly. Like, if you're playing the Fey Enchantress, yeah, you can beat the crap out of Grom very, very quickly. But when you are playing Franz, Grom is just going to almost certainly try and take Helmgard. And he's not the only one. You also have Kemmler, who may declare war on you, though he is going to have to go through Helmgard. So you need to take Helmgard. You can use the ambush stance. People have mentioned that. It is a cheese, let's be clear on that. It's presenting a weak target for the AI to sally out so you can ambush and destroy them. That's absolutely what it is. It does work. It's worked since Warhammer 2, but yeah, using cheese tactics to win. One of the ways to know that the campaign is difficult, and this certainly applies to Eltharion and Akari as well, and pretty much every faction on this list, is when you have to fight a lot of battles on your own manually. This is absolutely the case with Karl, because if you auto-resolve these battles in Grunberg and the army that you start to post to, you're just going to take significant casualties that you can't afford. And that's just the first few turns. Like the thing with Grom, the Imperial Secessionists, that's just the first few turns. But further to the north, we have Khazrak, who you start a war with. Now, Khazrak is going to get the full stack of troops. They're not necessarily great troops, so you are going to be able to defeat them fairly easily, but it is going to be a full stack of troops that you are also going to have to deal with. And this is, like, Grom and Khazrak are a certain threat within the first 10 turns. Another possible threat is the issue of Marienburg. Marienburg seems to be hard-coded towards taking Eilhart. It doesn't matter if you hold it or the Imperial Secessionists, all that they will likely declare war on whoever holds it and try and take it. Unless you have a full stack of troops. The problem is you can't really afford keeping a full stack of troops when you got Khazrak over here and you have other issues to deal with as well. So Marienburg is an annoyance. You have 3 factions, 2 of which are pretty strong, that you have to deal with pretty quickly beyond the rebels that aren't exactly a cakewalk either. And then there is the situation in the Empire as a whole. Every elector count that gets wiped out costs you Imperial authority. The one that's certainly going to be wiped out unless you move at the lightning speed, and even then not certain, is Hochland, because they start a war with Festus, the Leech Lord. Festus is going to be a major issue for the Empire. Like, Festus in a lot of campaigns I've seen so far takes significant chunks of the Empire. The elector counts can stop him, Reichland can stop him, so that is a problem. So he's going to take Hochland, that's going to cost you Imperial authority. That is a certainty. Now, Middenheim, under Boris Todbringer, Middenland, they may or may not fall. Generally, I've seen them that they're able to resist, but they are under threat from the Greenskins over here in the Black Pit. If we start to look at it, they are at war with the Black Pit and Khazrak from the very start of the campaign. So they're going to be under quite a good amount of pressure as well. So that is going to, those are certainly going to be issues for you to deal with, because you also may have to deal with these orcs as well. Although you can generally rely on Midland if you take out Kazrak to be able to hold their own to a certain degree. But Festus is going to be a problem that you're going to have to deal with early on, because if you don't, he's just going to run out of control. He may wipe out Asland as well, not just Hochland, and that's not just free, that's 6 Imperial Authority. And if you get to -6, then you're looking at losing control, growth, income from old buildings. If you get -7 or -10, if you get a -10, you have a civil war. All the Electrocons declare war against you. So that would be a major issue. Then there's Drycha. Drycha over here, she has a fairly scary army, because Drycha focuses on tree units, and those tree units are heavily armored units. Now you do have handgunners as your starting unit. You do get crossbowmen as a tier 2 unit, so it's not necessarily the biggest problem in the world for you to deal with her. But the problem with Drycha is that she's hard-coded pretty much to declare war on the Ostermark and go for Beckhaven and take out Ostermark. She may or may not wipe them out. That would be another free Imperial Authority. So you're already losing free because of Festus. You may lose free because of the Ostermark. Hell, you may lose free because of Katarin, who in pretty much every campaign I've seen so far has ended up in a war with Aslan. They just don't like each other. So these are free Elector counts. Hochland, ones that's certainly going to be wiped out. The Ostermark, that may be wiped out. Aslan, that may be wiped out. That could be destroyed very quickly. And then there's the threat to Midland, though, to be honest, because Karlberg is so close to you, you can certainly prevent its fall and prevent Todbringer's complete demise. And those are just early game issues. The issue with Drycha, the issue with Kislev, the issue with Festus, the issue with Grom. Those are just early game, very early game problems. Later on, we have other issues, major issues as well. Sylvania is a problem. Vlad, the vampire counts right now are fairly strong in Immortal Empire because their armies, their crewmen, their economy, etc. When you play as a vampire counts, like people are talked about, like, oh, I'm playing Gorst and I'm just winning every battle with just zombies. But even as a even as another vampire count that's not Gorst, you can do very well. Now, as far as I see it, there are stronger factions overall than that, but yeah, the vampire counts are in a really good place right now in Immortal Empires. And that means you get the threat of Sylvania. If you let Vlad establish himself, like he starts a war with Rebel faction, if you just let Vlad establish himself, really fortify Sylvania, you're going to have a hell of a nightmare towards the later game. So you can't really do that, so you need to deal with Vlad. But Vlad is just one of the mid-game problems. And this is why Franz is higher on this list than Akari or Eltharion, because Eltharion and Akari have a hard campaign start, but so does Franz. But Franz doesn't just have a hard campaign start, he has a hard campaign period. Mid-game, late game, it doesn't matter. So you have, towards the mid-game, you have the issue of Sylvania. Then you have the issue of Azag the Slaughter, who's someone you're also going to have to deal with. So you have 3 legendary lords that are a problem from the start. 4 if you count Drycha. 2 more to the east towards the mid-game that are going to be a problem. And then maybe even 4 or 5 if we count the World Walkers and Trot. Generally, it's going to be the World Walkers. Bellicor, generally Bretonia is going to go fight Bellicor, so he's not necessarily going to be a problem for you to deal with. But you're looking at 3 legendary lords in the mid-game as well. And so you have 3 at the start, 4 with Drycha, 3 in the mid-game. That's 7 legendary lords that are a problem. And we're talking here like the first 30, 40 turns. They are going to be an issue that you're going to have to deal with or contain in some way, shape, or form. The issue of the World Walkers is the reason you don't want to have to conquer Marienburg. It would be better to establish a peace treaty with them. Because if you do establish a peace treaty, Marienburg will do a decent enough job for a decent enough period of time to keep the World Walkers in check. They will eventually lose, so will Nordland, but it will give you the time you need. Nordland will do a decent job, but yeah, they're gonna have some problems with that. And then, of course, there is the issue that Kislev itself is under threat from Trog, Azazel, and some Norscan factions. And Kislev may not necessarily fall, but they're going to leave a major opening, in particular towards Aslan. So throughout your entire campaign as Franz, in particular, from start to finish, you're fighting numerous legendary lords, each of which is quite capable of doing enough damage on their own, and you're dealing with them yourself with a broken system of diplomacy and imperial authority currently for the Empire. It is absolutely one of the hardest campaigns right now. Though I would also use the word frustrating for the first few turns. Like, I would certainly call the mid and maybe even late game hard, but the early game I would call it frustrating, because it, like, to be honest with you about these Imperial Secessionists, they're not really much of a challenge. They're just a fucking frustration because you have to spend a decent amount of time fighting manual battles that you know you're gonna certainly win, but you can't rely on the auto-resolve. Like, if I go here and I auto-resolve it, just to show you this, it is a decisive victory, undeniably so, but look at 159 men. If I fought this battle manually, I would barely lose any men. And I would also kill more of the enemy. So that would be a higher benefit. Battle of Helmgart and all that, like, here, like, this is the thing, right? This is where it really goes in. There's no way this army can't beat this crappy garrison of spearmen and swordsmen. Absolutely no way. And yet, yeah, that is an issue. Like, the auto-resolve in Warhammer 3 is significantly better, but yeah, I would call it frustrating. It's not just hard, it's genuinely frustrating when you're thinking about dealing with the Imperial Secessionists. Without the Imperial Secessionists, it would be a much better time. But I think right now there needs to be some reforms, some changes made to Karl Franz in particular. Gelt is in a pretty good spot. Like, despite the fact that the Imperial Authority system is completely broken at the moment, Gelt himself, difficulty-wise, he's in a really good spot. Karl Franz is not. So, Karl Franz, number 3. And number 2, we have Thorek Ironbrow, whose campaign is completely and utterly broken as we speak right now. Why is that? Well, Thorek's campaign as a Dwarven campaign, well, the Dwarves already have significant issues with growth, though you do start with gold mine, so that's going to help you. The gold mine is one of the few silver linings you have in this campaign, as well as the fact that the Dwarves do have pretty strong early game armies, especially with the Quarrelers. But here's the problem with Thorek. You start here, and you're gonna have to go all the way here to get a lot of artifacts. Like, you see these icons, these are artifacts. You need these artifacts for the forge to get these various upgrades. But it's more than that. The artifacts, each of these artifacts, forging them, is a grudge they need to do. And each grudge, by turn 20 here in this campaign, is worth 24 points. This meter is full. It would be full even if I had 4 grudges. And it's going, the value starts, like, it starts, as you begin the campaign, it starts half full. If within 10 turns, it's going to be filled, because the value of the grudges is going to double, and then double, and double, and double. So, if you're playing a Thorek Ironbrow campaign, to put them simply, you are going to have to fight the entire campaign, essentially, as it currently stands, with minus 20 diplomatic relations for the Dwarves, minus 20% research, minus 3 control. I guess you do get the benefit of 15 charge bonus and Slayers, but you are going to be at the severe disadvantage. You're going to be at the severe disadvantage because you're going to get your research significantly slower, and so you're not going to be able to benefit from the same things as other Dwarven factions would do, and that is, to begin with, a major issue. And the public order problem is also an issue as well. But it's more than that. That's something that comes from bad design. Like, it's a broken campaign, it's bad design in Immortal Empires, they rushed Immortal Empires, this is the kind of things we get. Okay, But they can fix that. That's why it's called the beta. Fair enough. They generally called it the beta. They said it right in advance that there are going to be issues, etc. I can't understand how they fucking missed this. I admit, it's like, how the hell do you guys just not start the campaign and realize that there's a problem here? It's like, oh yeah, it's perfectly fine to start with the grudge meter half filled and double in like 10 turns. No, it's not. Hopefully it does get fixed in the first few patches, or the very first patch. But even if that was fixed, even if you had that meter fixed and it wasn't half filled from the very start, and it filled up much, much slower, you are in the Southlands Thunderdome, and there's no messing around with this. You've got Manfred, he declared war on me. He is pretty tough. You have Cetra, you have Volkmar, you have Skarbrand, you have Malagor. You have a huge number of problems that just don't like you. And your campaign is based around the idea of getting these artifacts to be able to win it. You do want to get these artifacts, but the problem is, well, you start here in Karak Zorn. And the issue is, to just get one of the first, you need to take the Golden Tower, which is held by the Last Defenders, which shouldn't be one of your threats, but they are. You're like, maybe you could get the diplomatic relation with them, maybe not. But you need to take Karak Orund and the Golden Tower for one artifact. Then you need to take Lamia for another one. So you have quite a lot to cover, a long round. And the problem is, the more of the map you cover, and this is what makes a hard campaign, the more of the map you cover, the more enemies you uncover. So here in the Misty Mountains, this is where Quick Headtaker starts. Skaven are notoriously difficult to fight, especially on harder difficulties, because they get very large armies. You might have good units as Dwarves, absolutely, but even with the good units, you're going to take a hell of a pounding. And to get all of these artifacts, you're going to go across the entire bloody map. It is an insane campaign. You are on a journey around the world. You've got a lot of places to go to, a lot of places to cover. It is quite a challenge. Quite a challenge across a vast expanse of territory. And that means you're going to be fighting a vast amount of enemies, because you need to go to these locations and take the settlements, or make deals with the factions that control them. But most of the time you're just going to show up with an army and curb stomp them to get what you want. So you have a campaign as a faction that has poor growth, does have some really strong endgame stuff if you can get there, but it's really difficult as the Dwarves to get there. You do have this gold mine, and that's going to give you that extra bit of gold that you do need to really survive for a decent amount of time, but you are absolutely going to have problems playing as Thorek, Ironbrow. Vast number of enemies, vast distances to cover, and currently a very, very broken grudge meter. With the only silver lining is that your army is incredibly powerful for an early game army. Though you don't have great replenishment, just remember that you don't have great army replenishment, so you do need to try and keep the casualties low as you fight from Karak Zorn all the way to the north. And because of the broken diplomatic relations, you're going to have issues dealing with other Dwarves currently. So yeah, one of the hardest campaigns. The sole reason that I'm not putting it as the hardest campaign on this list is that a significant portion of its difficulty currently does come from the broken grudge meter. Even without it, it still would be a very difficult campaign. But with it broken, it's certainly the hardest campaign. But that is a bug that will be fixed, hopefully, very quickly. But as it stands right now, by far and away the hardest campaign in the entire game. Due to a bug, due to a broken mechanic that hopefully will be resolved very shortly. Finally, at number 1, we have Tzarina Katarin of Kislev. Compared to Kostaltin and Boris, both of which are actually fairly strong and can have a decent enough start, Katarin's situation is one of genuine misery. For starters, her starting army is pretty weak. The only good unit that she has, and not necessarily one of the best in the game, is these ice guards with swords. In comparison, Kostaltin starts with 2 units of Streltsy, which are very good units, and Boris, who literally starts in hell itself over here, starts with 2 warbear units. So they both have substantially better armies. Beyond that, you also don't start with a hero. Now, not every faction starts with a hero, but you also don't have an easy way to recruit one for roughly 10 plus turns. Because in order to recruit a hero, you need to at least get some research. The research itself will take 4 turns, and then it's going to take a number of turns to actually get the hero recruited through that, to get the Nice Witch. And never mind that the Nice Witch is not necessarily going to be the best hero choice, as opposed to what Costin has, which is a Patriarch. A Patriarch is really useful for Kislev because they give you significant casualty replenishment. You don't have that as Katarin, and you don't really have an easy way of getting it either. Because Kislev itself starts level 1, it's going to take a lot of turns, even if you do construct the building, this particular building, for construction cost and 30 growth. Even if you do construct it, it is going to take a certain number of turns to be able to get this, assuming you can afford it devotion-wise. So you start at a significant military disadvantage compared to pretty much everyone else. I think Katarin's starting army, genuinely, is one of the weakest that exists for any faction in the entire game. And it gets worse, because she's not in some isolated corner of the campaign map where she can afford dealing with a weak starting army. No, she's right in the thick of the fighting from turn 1. So Katarin's starting situation with her limited army, and with only really the ability to recruit either Kossars with spears or Kossars, regular Kossars, is to deal with 2 armies of Norskans, both of which have 5 units in a Lord. And both of these armies have 1 unit Norscan Ice Trolls and a Mammoth. Both those units, the Norscan Trolls and the Mammoth, are better than anything you have except the Ice Guard. And you have to defeat these armies. Now you can do so. You can do so fairly reliably within the first 4 turns. I made a whole guide on that. But that's just the start. This is the minor faction you deal with, and if you try and auto-resolve this, you're gonna get your ass handed to you. But that's just the start, the first few turns. It's a waste of time, it's a frustration, it's boring. But it's not particularly difficult. However, what is difficult is what's gonna follow. To the north, you have the Helpit. You have Frat the Unclean. He's going to wipe out the small Kislev faction in Troll Country, the Tzarina Enclave. He's always going to do it within those 4 turns that you're going to use to take out this Norscan faction. Some people have suggested that you could go save the Enclave. You don't want to do that for reasons I'll get into. By the way, he's going to wipe them out. And then once he does that, he's going to make he's going to make 2 full stacks or 2.5 stacks of troops, and he's going to declare war on you. It is not a possibility, it is a certainty that he will declare war on you and march his armies against you. So within the first 10 turns, your 10-20 turns or so, you're not just fighting a powerful rebel faction, or a powerful enough rebel faction with a crap army. You're having to recruit tier 1 units to deal with 2 full stacks of Skaven, or 1 stack at the time. Now this is on legendary, so they're gonna have powerful garrisons in each of these settlements that they take. And beyond that situation, Skaven can also get higher settlement tiers from the start by using food. So for instance, they could, get these settlements to level 3 if they wanted to, or 2 or 3. That's one of the things that contributes to them having powerful garrisons here, or larger than expected garrisons. And Frat is going to be a problem. But there's more. Because if you think Frat is the only issue, no, you can defeat Frat. You have the army for it ultimately with massive Kossars. You use global recruitment, you get the full stack, you can win. It's not the easiest fight in the world, but you can win it. Fairly reliably too. The problem is what follows. You have Azazel. Warriors of Chaos are no joke currently. They're the most powerful faction overall in the entirety of Total War Warhammer 3 at this current stage. Vampire counts, dwarves, all that, like, there are powerful factions, right? But they are certainly one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful campaign faction in the game right now. So you have Azazel, he starts a war with the Brotherhood of the Bear, he's going to wipe them out, and then he's going to fight Costin. He's not too much of a threat, but he is going to be a concern. And then to the north you have Trog. And he's going to march with multiple stacks of troops against you. So from the first 10-20 turns, you already have 3 legendary lords to deal with. And it is a certainty that you will have to deal with them in some capacity. Frat, Azazel, Trog. But there's more. Then you have Aslan, then Ostermark. Now, Aslan doesn't particularly like you and may very well declare war against you. Relations between Kislev and Aslan aren't exactly friendly. But that's a minor faction, not necessarily too big of an issue, and hey, if you can take that gold mine, that might benefit you. The real problem, however, lies in the south and the east. To the east, you have Azak the Slaughterer. Now, Azak at some point is going to declare war against you as the player. And you are going to be put in a position where you have to deal with that. You can deal with him with your army. And I keep referencing this point that your army can handle it, because there is something that they can't handle very well. You can defeat Azak. Even with a full army, you can defeat Azak. But the problem is, you have these threats to the north that are always going to pressure Costin. If you let him fall, if you let him on his own, if you let Prague fall, then things are going to get much, much, much worse for you. And there's another factor that has to do with campaign mechanics for Kislev that makes the situation much worse as well. But you have Azak, you can defeat him. A faction that you may not be able to defeat so easily is Drycha. Why is that? Well, Wood Elves are not a really powerful faction necessarily, but they are an exceptionally powerful from military perspective. Not necessarily economy or anything like that, but military-wise, Wood Elves are one of the strongest factions in the game. And Drycha in particular can beat the crap out of you as a player. Why is that? Well, she starts with the Griffin Wood. She's already level 2. And she can... And her faction is focused on creatures. Tree men, tree spirits, forest creatures. And the issue is that within 10, 20, maybe 30 turns, she's going to be able to recruit 3 units that are heavily armored and you don't really have a good counter for, unless you end up recruiting armored Hussars. Because your tier 1 units are weak against armor. And she's going to throw heavily armored units. And she also has fear and terror to throw against you. So she can rout your army pretty quickly. Drycha can genuinely beat the crap out of you. And that's a situation that no other legendary lord in the campaign necessarily has. Because they might have challengers. They might have issues to deal with. And they might have armies. But none so far, none that I've talked to here, have a genuine threat that not only is going to declare against them, but has a genuinely more powerful army than they do, and for which you don't have any really easily available counters, because your settlement starts level 1, it's going to take a while to get to level 2, and then the question is, do you sacrifice your economy to get armored Kossars? And armored Kossars are not necessarily the best units either for this. You need armor-piercing missile units, but you can't get those, because you can't really easily get Streltsy. Because Streltsy are a higher tier of units. So that creates a major problem to deal with as Katarin. And in general, you start with 3 legendary lords to the north that you have to deal with. 2 to the south that may or may not declare war. It's not a certainty that Drycha declares war on you, or Azak, though it can be expected. And then there's Festus, who may end up being a threat. So you have 6 legendary lords in your nearby surroundings. What caps this all off is the campaign mechanic of supporters. You care about supporters because at each threshold you gain a permanent faction benefit of diplomatic relations, control, leadership, and speed. You want to reach every threshold, but getting the first one, getting these thresholds, can be an absolute nightmare. The reason is, in order to get supporters, you have 2 options. You can either build churches, which cost devotion, this special campaign mechanic, right? So if you defeat forces of chaos like Norskins or demons or chaos warriors, you will get devotion. Or you can build churches for a bit of devotion and supporters, but they do cost devotion to first, to be specific. And Another way to gain supporters beyond defeating armies of certain enemies, though not all of them, is to invoke the motherland, and then you get an effect. Orson is your best choice because he gives you 5 when you occupy a settlement. But this is where a real problem comes in. You only get devotion for Chaos, Warriors of Chaos, or Demons, right? You don't get it for Skaven, or you don't get it for Azag, you don't get it for Drycha. So you might be fighting those and gaining nothing. No devotion, no supporters, nothing like that. You can invoke one of the gods of Kislev that will give you 2 for fighting battle, but Urson is really the best. But realistically, you will only be able to use this once as Katarin because you just start with only 100 devotion and you don't necessarily have an easy way of getting a lot of it early on. So that quickly becomes a problem. So your game plan is pretty much forced on you, and you can't really deviate from it because if you deviate, you either end up in a worse military economic position or you just don't get the supporters, or both really. So what you do is you have to fight these battles manually against these Norscan rebels, these Norscans that occupy the southern oblast. You declare, you march your army here, you take this army out, the settlement out. You have to fight this manually. You can, but it is frustration. Then within 4 turns, you take out this other army, you take Fort Chikova. I've done a whole guide, you can check that out. After that, you have to go deal with Fraud. And by taking back Troll Country from him, you'll end up with 25 supporters. And hopefully, if you fight and the thing about fighting battles manually is, if you fight battles manually and inflict significant casualties, you end up with potentially more devotion here. Like you can get 17 devotion or something like that from this army with the post-battle option. Whereas if you auto-resolve, just to demonstrate this, if I just move this here, it's a Pyrrhic victory. It is a victory, but I only gain 4 devotion. Now that's not too bad, to be specific, but you do need more. So you're in a situation where you have to fight a lot of battles manually because of either the need to increase rewards or to not lose units. Like if I take this army and attack the settlement, I'm going to lose pretty much every unit here in this army. I'll certainly lose the damaged units, so I'll be left with maybe only the Ice Guard, Wing Lancers, and Snow Leopard. And then you have to take your initial province, take down, while also fighting the battles manually, or at least open field battles manually to get devotion. That one open field battle manually to get devotion. Then take Troll Country, get those 25 supporters, hopefully 30 if you can get churches, because you need to reach 30 here. You'll gain 5 for settlements. Yes. Like if I take Katarin here, I'm not sure I necessarily even win this battle right now. No. Impossible. I took too much damage in auto-resolve. The auto-resolve is a fickle one. Very fickle one. So it is a genuinely brutal campaign in a lot more ways than one. If Thorek's... though I would say if Thorek's situation wasn't as a result of a bug, I'd certainly say his would be the hardest campaign, because having to fight an entire campaign with -3 public order is genuinely brutal. But that is a bug that's on the side that will be fixed. Kislev needs more than just a grudge meter fix to be viable. Like, Katarin needs a stronger army, she needs a better way of gaining supporters, and she needs to not be surrounded by legendary lords that all want her blood. And to think that this is supposed to be one of the more friendly factions. I mean, there are powerful benefits to Katarin. That's the thing, though. That's the crazy thing. She is genuinely the strongest of the legendary lords when you're thinking about faction benefit. Because if you look at it, she gets 6 control, hero rank for Frost Maidens, Ice Court training session. So it is much easier to get those powerful casters. You get a lot of control, which helps you out. And she herself, as her lord effect, gets -6 corruption and upkeep of -50% for Ice Guard. So she is powerful. Don't get me wrong, in terms of faction benefits, she is incredibly powerful. But the problem is she has such a crap start that is a genuine misery to deal with it. And it's not just going to be the start that's going to be the problem with Katarin. It's going to be Azag, it's going to be Drycha, eventually Sylvania, eventually Festus, eventually potentially Archaon or the Demon Prince. Archaon does feel very passive right now. So by far and away, Katarin is the hardest legendary lord to play currently in Total War Warhammer 3. I do feel that all of these legendary lords to a degree or another need some changes. Some people will argue that currently overall Immortal Empires is too easy. I can understand that, but I also want to make this argument. While Warhammer 2 in general overall was substantially more difficult, it wasn't difficult in a good way. Because believe it or not, difficulty is not the be all and end all. How you make something difficult is important. Now, for people who enjoy the campaign style of Legend of Total War, who spends 30 minutes in a battle just cycle charging units and also running his hero around just to, or his lord around just to waste the ammunition of enemy units, fine. If that's what you like, fine. But that is a crap gameplay style. The fact that you have to do that, especially in Warhammer 2, to have any real genuine chance, or corner camping and all that stuff, that needs to die. So yes, Warhammer 3 is a lot easier in that respect because it doesn't have the same kind of metric ton of bullshit buffs on Legendary as it did in Warhammer 2. It's a lot better in that respect. So I think that certainly Warhammer 3 does have an issue in engagement. How do you make a campaign fun? Absolutely, but it's about engagement, not challenge. Challenge in an isolation means zilch. You can have extreme challenges, absolutely, but how things are challenging is just as important in my mind as them being challenging to begin with. Because one of the things I do feel with Total War difficulty, and one of the things I felt for years, is that the level of difficulty has been a metric pile of crap for a very, very long time, and that I feel needs to change. I do appreciate overall what they've done with Warhammer 3. I greatly appreciate how they designed the Warriors of Chaos, but they do certainly have some issues because now we have a lot of the difficulty has been reduced, but we end up with problems like, well, why do you have to buy battles anymore, right? If you don't need them, for instance. So that's a whole discussion that can be had, however. But for now, Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. If you do enjoy my content, join my Discord. Consider donating via PayPal or Patreon. Could greatly use your support. And I'll see you boys next time.